Okay, we enter part two in this. If you haven't seen part one, at the end of this one, it'll actually be in your top left-hand corner, and I'll make this one that goes circling around with each other. If you've been able to stick with me, now I get to enter the part where I talk about ESP, woo, and how this really attaches all to religion and what people might think. Funny, we stopped on this picture that's right here, and it's in a way, and giving you the same response chemically in your mind when some preacher goes through some thoughts that you do that, just like it is whenever you watch a crime drama show and there is something in that that's enough intensity to get you up, and the same idea that a lot of the stories in the Bible are. You see, strangely, testing people's minds and stuff back in the 50s and so on, I'm sure they talked about all kinds of ESP they were trying to find out with people and what they could actually detect of them being able to do or pull off over time. And they found that certain parts of the brain were the ones that would activate by putting those probes on your head everybody's familiar with, that people did and stuff. And you have this cognition point right here in the frontal lobe and the frontal cortex. And really, in that part one, I showed you a Homo erectus, and they didn't believe they really had much of this going on due to brain volume and concise and the way that it works out and the way their folds of their brain would work and so on. In fact, there's a question somebody brought up as to whether or not they even would dream, because they probably wouldn't have this same cognition thing that we're talking about now at this point. We are steps away in evolution from each point from each other here. Someone real bright once said back in the 1800s, if this evolution stuff, right after it came out, late 1800s, they were talking about it. He said, this evolution stuff is in there. What's all this Jesus thing about? Yeah, it's a famous man too, but hey, so these are the areas of the brain that shows you what's going on there. And so they figured out that all these chemicals get released in your brain, right? And whenever you go through certain effects, like somebody sees somebody pinned under a car, and all of a sudden adrenaline kicks in. Well, that's a chemical that your brain is able to secrete at any time, but it holds it back like the venom of a snake, and releases it if it really needs to happen during a crucial point or whatever. And suddenly your strength is much more than it really was originally. I'm sure you've heard and read stories about this. And so they have this concept of dualism of the brain, where it requires a body to think and its mind would be a liability. And that's just saying that your brain is doing a lot of this on its own. In some ways, you think of this philosophically or whatever, but belief in some form of life apart from what that is experienced in a body is the default setting of the human brain. This was said by Bering back in 2004 in a psychological idea, talking about a lot of different things, but this is one idea and concept that shows you that that idea of that third viewpoint of being able to think of driving to the store, and in your mind you've got a whole picture in your mind of how it would look, and it's certain street lights, things like that, pulling up into the parking lot. A lot of these can flash through your mind real quickly. It's a third eye situation, if you will. It's happening inside. You're not seeing it from your regular eyes. You're seeing it from your third eye. There's another key point in that third eye situation I talked about a couple years ago in another set of videos, but let's continue here with this idea that's going on. You see, because there's a connection with ESP that goes on here. Before we, see that, we're going to talk about this Quafza 2 found at about 90,000 years ago Well, this is a Homo sapiens, and he was found as Claus is in Israel. So he's found in that area, in that middle area, where he's one of those people which we talked about in the first place, where they said he'd come out of Africa. And where's all this radical changing? Because you can see his vaulted cranium and everything that goes on there. Oh, well, that never happened like that. The people that came out of Africa were already modern humans. They just didn't have a Neanderthal blend. They weren't quite exactly what modern humans are, but they're saying that that happened around before this date here. That you wouldn't tell the difference of a Caucasoid type human. But can we get to ESP? Well, so here's a concept for you this man used, and I think it's kind of valid. If I was to tell you there was a magic tree, like they tell you in the Bible in Genesis, there's this magic tree they eat from, and da-da-da-da. If I was to tell you that, that would go about 2 levels of the idea that you won't accept it. You already know too much about the trees and so on, but if I told you there was a special tree in a special place, that during the full moon, if you were to turn around and talk to your ancestors, they could hear you, for some reason, all of a sudden, you're eager to want to believe in this magic idea, aren't you? It's a whole lot more cognate. It's the reason, so many times, just even the first part of Genesis is like, what? Like you have a woman that grows from a rib, and then she eats from a magic tree, then talks to a magic talking snake, and he's the one that told her to do it. To me, that's 3. But you're not supposed to rationally actually get past 1. What if you're brought up as a kid from that little point where you're reaching up for your parents and that type of idea, and as you start to cognate humanity, it's shoved in you the idea that there's somebody bigger than daddy. You find whenever he hangs around granddad, he acts totally different somewhat at him because, well, that's his dad. And at one time, you start to figure out at one time, he was you. And, oh, wow. And so there's this grandfather, and then there's this concept that they all talk about of your great-grandfather. One of my grandfathers on one side was passed away before us kids all grew up, although my uncles had children before my dad did and got to meet him and you got to see him and stuff. And I was a little jealous about that until I found out much later that they were like 1 and 3 whenever that happened. And sure, there's a picture with him. That was like the year before he died. And they didn't really get to see him too either or whatever. But I was like, wow, I wish I could have seen him. All I saw was 5 or 6 pictures my dad had of him. But in that effect, there's a great granddad, and they talked about him, and in your mind, all of a sudden, you get a total different concept, and that's that third eye situation where you can almost reach back, and if they have a picture of him or some representation, and they agree upon it, you'll start to cognate different things about it, and because of just a few things said about this person, you feel like you can almost attach to this point. Earlier in part 1, we talked about how you can attach yourself to somebody that you know and have a fake conversation that'll probably go about the way that it goes and things on that concept. But if you believe it, you could go back in time if you just look at some Abe Lincoln stuff and things, and you could go back in time and imagine yourself actually being able to say things back and forth to Abraham Lincoln just like you could of your parents. In fact, if you have a good enough cognition about one certain point or a person like Caesar or somebody, and a good enough idea what goes on, you might even be able to have a fake conversation with these other people way back in time, so it kind of can have a reach over time and depth in that same concept. And this is something, again, that's natural within us, just on hunting and gathering concepts that were honed to the point that they became perfected, where mankind took over the world. Master of Beasts and all of that concept, but in that, this all enveloped out. Earlier I was talking about a one-off concept being able to be accepted easily, and that's because that's where stories and folklore and fairy tales and things like that come from. And in that fact, you can actually get the startings of folklore, which ends up making religions. So it can all end up hooking up together, kind of hopefully well enough for where you can understand, and it's ringing a bell for you if you get the concept. So this magic tree here, you've heard about a lot of times in folklore and tales like that, and it's in your Bible and so on like that. And if we're not too far out in left field, you can go with the concept. You do it all the time whenever you watch movies. Said I was going to tell you about ESP, didn't I? Don't know what picture to put it on for ESP. Hold on a minute. So this supernatural template shows you that you can have counterintuitive physical properties to this thing, i.e. the magic tree that does this one special thing at a certain time, or counterintuitive biology, which you'll see a lot of time in this magic idea, or these people can fly, or anything else, simple and complex. Counterintuitive psychology and concepts which in your mind would be like, oh, I don't know, but then you blame it on it's the gods. They know something in a much longer time and understand things so much better. Always attributions of a human mental state, though, usually at the time it's in question. You know, Percy Bryce Shelley, I think it's hooked up with him and his wife and Frankenstein and all the stories that they come out of that we all adore, once said there is no attribute of God which is not either borrowed from the passions and powers of the human mind, or which is not a negation of such, I guess. He said that way back in 1814 when he was around, and that was in a thing that he was saying, a refutation of deism, like, what's all this stuff about God? He was refuting it. Once somebody pretty smart said religions work to suppress our inner chimp and bring out our inner bee. Now we're back to talking about bees again, because you see, way back in part one there, we referred to those ideas and those ideals of a modern civilization society, and I almost said it then, and I should have really, so I can do that thing like a comedian, bringing back that knowledge again, because, well, hopefully I can interject it back in the other one, because those were all attributes that they found that bees have, and how they'll self-sacrifice themselves and give up their stinger and know they're dying to try to get you away from the hive, the whole hive belief and hive concept. And of course, we've seen them even have this bee idea, and the idea of them having bee wings, almost like the bugaloos or something like that, in this angel concept, which again varies, but it's usually in a bird concept of being able to fly, but sometimes it looks more like a butterfly because they've got four sets of wings, or like a dragonfly, and you see his split wings. But all these chemicals get released by your brain, and they do extra little things for you. You know, serotonin and stuff is what they give you whenever they're trying to mood elevate you. Like, taking Xanax and things like that, try to up your levels. It gives you more confidence, it gives you more things like that. What they show here is norepinephrine is actually like adrenaline itself. Dopamine down in the bottom left hand corner going off the screen there is real important. That's that little rush that you get from sugar or things like that, but you also get your body secreting a little of it every time you get a satisfaction point. Almost like, oh, think about it as playing the slots. and you're playing, and na ka-ting, 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 ka-ting. There's the dopamine rush right there. So there's different types of this stuff. In fact, the oxytocin that you see on the right hand side and the big colorful conglomerate thing right there is something that's released too, and it has to do with people trying to care about each other and have a touch with each other. In fact, once they make a connection of touch, they can even have a little bit more ESP than the normal person would have towards that person. Anybody that's been married for a long time or anything, or even friends for a good long time, will get an idea and enough insight to be able to utilize that concept. It's kind of a premonition concept too. And then down at the bottom is endorphins, which you've always heard about, and their releases and what they do for you and the incredible things they can pull off. So we talked about dance, and dance, how it relates and how people can become one together, like a line dance, like you think of country line dancing and everybody's doing the same thing and waiting for that one part, everybody kicks and turns and does a little thing or whatever. That same effect can be found in portions in every type of dance there is, from the waltz, and whenever you swirl her around or you do everything else, and she's doing it too because she's anticipating it, and it's all syncopated around on these beats and this music. Well, I should have said this back when we were still looking at the Pope, but music and dancing in church is something that got kicked out of it a long time ago. For, you know, those pews that you see in there? Well, that's pretty much something from the medieval age, because it used to be more open, definitely. And then there was people dancing and doing things too much, and they didn't like it, and they wanted to refine it and become ho 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 about things during that time and the Renaissance and so on. And all of a sudden they put in benches and stuff, but then the rich people started buying all the benches up where they sat in a good spot, and then they changed it to the common pews that you see today, which usually can be just pushed right out of the way for Sunday dance, and here we go. But it makes connections within people to just touch each other. Sure, y'all have ever had a good hug or things like that, and the endorphins that get released at that point from you, and it's really a part of this chemicals that are just in your brain. We like all these aspects, though. It's something that's real neat. Just like they've turned around and they've shown, if somebody watches Old Yeller or Where the Red Fern Grows, when it gets to that point and everybody wants to Niagara Falls, that you hit the same emotion, just about the same emotion you would as if you're witnessing it. And it's not just some image on a screen. If you've ever had an emotional girlfriend, or you're emotional yourself in some ways, you've probably had this happen a lot. You might get emotional during Christmas time. You might even know the truth and reality about Christmas, like myself, and still have emotional moments during Christmas time, especially with your kids and things like that. And you think about years gone past and how this had happened from great-grandfather all the way down. You have this idea of somebody that used to be at that level, and in your mind it's easy enough to replace that great man, that hero of old, and so on, which was ancestor veneration, with somebody even greater, even than my dad and everything else. For he's like a god, and it just takes a small step over a chasm that's not even wide anymore at all for you to take that concept into saying, that's God, and get a religion going on. I made videos about ancestor veneration, and hopefully I've illuminated that portion of the idea that we're giving off right now, that whenever I made that connection just then, you're easily able to put them together. And now you might be able to see how, with our third eye and our inner thoughts, which is naturally bred into us, and a natural part of this evolution, which this is Darwin we're looking at here, but a natural part of this evolution apparently. And we got to a certain point and all these cognition skills come in and they started working together. And a lot of people claim it has to do with dance and music, as he even does himself here in his Descent of Man, whenever he says that I conclude that musical notes and rhythm were first acquired by the male or female progenitors of mankind for the sake of charming the opposite sex, and the musical tones became firmly associated with some of the strongest passions an animal is capable of feeling. Darwin wrote that about Descent of Man. You know, whenever he wrote all about that, things about evolution, one thing he looks like he avoided in there is anything talking about man. He only made the statement that after figuring this all out, we'll probably understand the origins of mankind much better. He didn't want to fight against religion so much, but you can imagine when this came out how it just destroyed that book. But you still had people going on with it, and you still have people going on with it today pretty firmly. And the reason you do is because of an endorphin release, and people want to be together, and they want to have hands and touch and everything like that. They want to have this common belief system and agree into it. Whenever you're young and you're into it and you're just learning, you get to a certain point, and then you start to get cocky about it like you know a bunch. You've seen it and heard it a bunch of times. You go to church enough, and then somebody you may not know, you're able to say something to, and that, whenever you do, gives you a point of satisfaction that kicks off that same good rush we were talking about before. It's the same thing if you make a good out in baseball. Same concept. So I don't know, leave it on Darwin where I say this next one and I try to hook it up to the idea of people having ESP. There's an effect that we have where we can look at things in a third person's point of view, like we were talking about before. How about Gobekli Tepe? There's a point of cognition that goes on here. On your left side is just one of the little pillar sets that goes around in Gobekli Tepe here, which showing you it's right at the Younger Dryas event or the end of the last ice age. On the right over there are things that are much bigger than kegs that beer used to be in. They've tested it and shows up beer. So there's a big connection there too. And there's a connection with intoxicants and things like that, and how it makes you a little more loose and free. Makes you want to dance a little more perhaps. Things like that. So it all goes together. Although it seems like a strange conglomeration of things when you think about it in the primordial way these people were at that time. This was the thing. And up until the medieval times, people used to dance in church a whole lot and listen to music. But they don't anymore in certain denominations. It's looked at as being of the devil and all kinds of crazy things. Whenever David used to play the lyre and made up all kinds of songs so they could go off of that, but they don't want to. They're just to be different, just to whatever. Oh man, hopefully I've kept y'all till now. Well, how do you get ESP out of that? Well, here's the weird thing, okay? You know those probes they put all around on people's head and they do the tests on it and everything. So they've done ones like that and did the old Yeller effect, and the people feel the sorrow, and they figured out where in your brain it kind of does sorrow, and where does this and where does that. And amazingly, if you have somebody that you don't even know next to you whenever this happens, and you're not feeling alone, and this person just puts his hand on your shoulder or whatever, and you see the same scene, it's not as dramatic to you. It helps you out. And in fact, if you know this person, the effect is less than half of that. Showing you that there's a comfort with this extra thing, and this goes all the way back to the starting whenever, we're all scratching each other's backs, and we've got binocular vision now, so we're real focused on forward so we can see things good, but somebody's got to watch my back. How does that go back? They believe it connects to the shrew kind of primate shrew thing that we were connected to. I mean, this is things like You can also guess, because of our fear of night and the things that go on and all the things we talk about it, how light is intelligence and darkness and everything else, that this creature back then wasn't very nocturnal, was it? Nocturnal means nighttime or whatever. So how do you get ESP out of it? Well, so using these tests that I showed you about with those persons touching you and things like that, that makes a difference too. But they also noticed another effect. If they were to prick your finger on your right hand, it actually made on your left brain do an effect, and then it ripples through your mind, and there's a reaction to it. Well, they noticed whenever you just watched it on a TV with these test subjects to a high degree, that whenever they saw somebody else get pricked in the right hand, that your brain activated just like the same way as when you got pricked yourself. If it was his left hand, it would be the other way around too. In fact, there was a sensor receptor versus pinpricks telling you that, yeah, even if it's the foot, it's the foot. It happens basically everywhere, where you, due to an empathy of being able to get into the moment in that third eye situation that you're caught in, like a kid watching cartoons and stuck and can't hear your parents, you get this concept of you're connected to that person. And it's not even happening to just that guy over there. You know, like whenever you see somebody get kicked in the nuts and all us guys kind of go, whoa, and we all close our legs a little bit. That can happen, but it happens still whenever it happens on TV, doesn't it? There's an empathy situation that goes on there, but they know that it's exaggerated from two people that know each other. And you get that extra point out of it, whether they're in front of you and they've got their hand on your shoulder, or they're in the same room, or you're even having a fake dream about it in your mind about what might happen whenever you see her after work, or when y'all go out to dinner, or after, or whatever. And in your mind you have a little interaction moment that happens. That's, again, something that you made up all in your mind, but it's all part of your cognitive skills, figuring out things that it throws at you immediately, a bunch of scenarios to help you out whenever it actually really happens. You can look at this as being whenever you first try to talk to girls, or if you ever ran into a bear. Everybody listening, very few probably have ran into a bear. But you've already seen enough things and you've run it through your mind enough times, and whenever I said it right then, you did it then too. And made a picture in your mind about running through a bear, or running from a bear, or not running. What do? Well, you try to hold him off and make him go away for a while, but do you play dead instantly? Do you what kind of bear is it? Where are we at? What's going on here? Scenarios that also might make you think in a picture in your mind, next time you go camping, I just want to take a knife with me for a reason, or some bear spray. Just 'cause. So this is a protective thing. This happens during dreaming too, where I told my daughters long ago, whenever they were kids and they started having nightmares, I told them, well, there aren't any bad creatures like that. We found them all out. You'll find them out in school, lions and tigers and bear. There's none of them around in here, and you don't have to worry about that much. Most of these things that you hear about, of course, are really just bad people, so we want you to watch out for that. But that, dreams and nightmares are really just you running the scenarios through your mind. If something like this was to happen, what would I do? Just in case it ever happens. Yeah. Kind of like a guy camping and have a dream that a bear's trying to attack him, and wake up like, oh my God, and hear something on the front porch and look, and there's a bear looking in the window at him, and be like, wow. That's so deja vu. Well, perhaps when you were sleeping, you realized what that was. Your mind gave you a dream of what that was. Well, does that happen all the time? Wake you up? No. But that cognition skill that I was talking about, that I've shown over and over again, shows you this concept of the most primordial human thoughts, that most of which don't happen without you voluntarily even thinking of it, that you can make these pictures in your mind. Then you have B concept, where you have your parents and how you look up to them, and there's got to be a step above that and above that. And it's not just great granddad, but he becomes the great man in the sky, because they always tell you after Pop dies that he's up in the clouds now or whatever, and so that's that same situation. Of course, this now talks to the astrotheology and the way that when people die, they go to heaven. In fact, they used to put them up on daises and let birds eat them, and I've shown that's where angel concepts come from, and not from the people you think did, but from what you would consider them to be pagans. But the bird took the soul up into the heavens and stuff. Of course, other people, started burning the people and cremating them, but then they're turned to a smoke like a spirit, and that goes up to the heavens. All kinds of different ideas. Much different than what we have today, but they all seem to have stemmed from the same concept, where somebody can actually have an idea of something that's not even there, something that's external. Like I say, looking at the TV, watching TV shows, you get into it good enough, nobody makes a stupid noise, no cat knocks anything over, whatever. You get very deep into it. When an emotion happens, you feel it, you go through it, your mind creates these things. You can have that same effect whenever you just imagine it in your own mind, by the way, and it's real enough. But the ESP hooking up to different people is kind of different. And a lot of times, if you've experienced it enough on your own and in your own mind, in a lot of different scenarios, you work it through pretty well. So we're geared to work off the unknown scenario. And believe it or not, the unknown scenario hooks up to the unknown God type concept that starts way back at where did all this come from? How did it get created? And they want to put it on Pop, if you follow me. This hooks up to ancestor veneration. And it only, again, takes a little small step to go from ancestor veneration, which I've done other videos about in the past and show you the aspects of that, into being something that turned into a religion about somebody that did something like a Samson, and people worshiping him. But over time you start to accrue all these different stories, and it becomes a pantheon, and then all of a sudden it becomes something totally different. And they told two friends, and they told two friends, and it goes on from there, and lo and behold, we've got a religion here that's going on that they've pretty much by now lost the whole reason that we started everything, except for some of the aspects of it. And what are they still doing that's going on? All that dancing. They're doing that repeated dancing. You see Islam and you watch them and they're bowing all together in the same beat with each other. What's that? It's that hookup with each other. When you see them at the mosque and they're going around and around, and it looks like Saturn with the ring going around this is the same thing as it would be for a line dance. If you do things like this at church, have church functions that have anything like this or whatever, you can have that moment and at church, but you also still have it whenever they're telling you these stories. Again, you can just sit here where you've been listening to me, and hopefully somewhere in some of my videos I've sparked emotions that have popped left, right, up, down, back, east, up, north, down, south. And they've triggered things in you, and all of it's generally looking at a picture or so on like that, and we're not even there. Isn't it amazing? It's like a telephone. You can talk to somebody who isn't even there. You can get inside the mind of the person doing this. Like getting inside mine and realizing what I'm talking about. Hopefully that is the idea that, see, that's the one that you get automatically. Whenever I tell you something, or somebody's saying something, or you listen to a song, you're getting pictures in your mind that happen because of that. And that cognition point, that's the same kind of idea that we're talking about, that's inbred into us naturally as all, is that thing that fuels the same concept that brings about the idea that wants to have a religion. You mix that with the idea of pick me up, Father. You know, you get this father concept, or this super great grandpop father concept on the Bible, and there you go. Doesn't take too much more mixed with it, and you can get a different concept out of it, totally out of it, and it's developed into a religion. Strange things about Gobekli Tepe, but I've got with Gobekli Tepe and the other 9 sites that's there, and all the other videos I've done about them and showing stonework before pottery and things like that. We don't have to go into that situation, but you know, here's one of those pictures that's like a canary in a coal mine, or no, it's like a snowball in hell, where everybody was thinking, yeah, but it all dies off at a certain point, doesn't it? And it's like, no, there looks like there's stuff like Stonehenge built. There's like 50 of them. They're all hooked up together. These people had a primordial religion going on and everything, and people don't want to talk about that because of the current belief system that a lot of people are trapped into for the last 2,000 years or more. But how does religion get formed out of it? Well, in some ways, this was the science of how that happens. And so this meets with astrotheology, and together they formed Voltron. And that led downhill to the eventual Sumerians and all their concept they have going on that you know about, I've told you about, and you may have studied about. Same thing in the Egyptians, though. It just splits another way, like a Y there. Those important people that were in between and all through the Fertile Crescent, including Egypt, and develops their religions, which you can still see hints of animism and things like that in the Sumerians, with eagle-headed people and all kinds of different zodiacal god form heads and so on. It's like that, but hopefully you easily see it in Egypt too. In fact, they have personages that take on that concept or aspect of a god that has something to do with the primordial aspect of those creatures too. If you look through time, a lot of those developed over time. They had different things that they said. The Sumerians had a couple of creation myths, and then it gets twisted again with the Assyrians and them coming in and adding on to it, and here we go. We've got a few different versions of that. We have the same thing in Egypt, where it went through a few different cadences, and people down here were believing something totally different than here, and it changed over time and all that, and who was special and who was out of it. That all gets pulled all together into one great God, great grandpop. Whose side is it on? Well, they even made that important to think about in the Bible. So again, it has this other effect too, where it's like when you're a kid, and then when you grow up, you have a adult idea of that you can still be a kid, that there's something after, and that it's going to be more wonderful than ever. And you can believe that the cavemen people that came up with this idea, or the prehistoric people that came up with this idea, didn't have the eventual idea that we have today, which is quite archaic at this point and outdated, but I guess that's for other types of videos. Pretty interesting way to look at it though here in this ESP that we apparently have. Whenever we feel it in the same way, it's like a ghost limb effect, if you've ever heard of that. That's pretty odd and important, but also that's something that if we honed in on a little stronger, what could we get that to do? At one primordial time when our senses were heightened somewhat in the older times that we've been talking about here, did we have that effect in a different cognition skill and it gave us a little more insight? Or at least gave us the flight and fright idea on what it could be? You know, like, oh God, it's a bear, and you start running and you look back and a squirrel that's been through the leaves hops out, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess I got that wrong. So then you come back and then a bear does walk out of the woods. I think I've rambled on long enough, but hopefully you see the connection. This idea of a dopamine, a simple chemical in your mind, and how that can be enhanced, of course, with beer and things like that that we're showing here. And somebody's inhibitions and so on that can be done like that. And other drugs are used for insight and have been for religions in all of recorded history. Because when you're in that state, that altered state, quite often you'll stare off, and then as soon as you do, you go into that third eye mode, really, and all of a sudden you're having this fake conversation or this thing that happens there. But you can also use that same idea to have a fake conversation with your parents to, you know, I don't know, keep touch with them, to say hello, to do things like that, all kinds of things you can make out of it. I mean, don't go crazy with the idea, but at the same thing, you can do that, or you can do it with people that you know, or celebrities, or whatever you want to in your mind in a simple idea. Everybody listening probably understands this concept. If you take that with the idea of ancestor veneration, you take it one more step, there's the great man in the clouds. It's as simple as that. Mix it with astrotheology and Voltron happens. Hopefully this gives you some insight into it. After what I've been through recently doing all these videos, and then I saw this effect on it, and I go, yes, that needs to be spoken about too. And hopefully y'all got it. I wish I could do this in a way that I even felt somehow that gave you the whole gist of it in about 20 minutes, but I think that's almost impossible. Hopefully y'all stuck with me to this point. Appreciate it if you have. Give me an idea what you think down below, and if you missed part one, it's in your top left-hand corner. Peace.